yet to interview somebody who is doing market research for a living. So this is going to be fascinating. But before we jump into that, I'd love to talk about your unique background that you have. You were not always doing market research. So first of all, you've kind of maybe walk us through the kind of the background. But you've done journalism first,
yeah,
and then you became a professional trader, and then somehow, you took the path to do some market research. Walk me through that.
Yeah, I came back to my roots, right? So I guess starting off, I always had a dream to just be a great writer. I wanted to, I was an English major. I studied English Lit over in University of East Anglia in London. And when I got here and I realized that wasn't paying the bills too quickly, I jumped quickly into journalism. And I started working in business journalism. So at Business Week, S&P, and quickly got, really interested in the markets and also industry trades. And so I got deep down the rabbit hole on electric, energy, transmission and distribution, aviation, and then eventually got to tech. Started working for CMP Media, which at the time had some great titles like, PC Week, VAR Business. And I really started to get interested in technology. From there, I ended up on the Wall Street side. And I was working as a director of research, and I ran the trading desk for a couple of smaller boutique shops. And that was the majority of my career. Still always loving tech and industrials, where they're the two areas I really focused on. And eventually what happened was about 7 years ago, a friend of mine and I had started this company, ETR. Started that back in 2010. And he was running it on his own, but he kept begging me to come, please join me. I need somebody on the research side. And we'll get a little bit more into why we founded ETR and what we thought the niche was. But eventually he wore me down and I left Wall Street. And the truth was I saw a lot of the research that was being provided by Wall Street was being commoditized. How many analysts and banks do you need to tell you if it's a buy or sell rating on a stock? After a while, it just wasn't that useful. And we really saw that data was going to be the avenue that was going. Obviously, there were quant funds that were out there consuming data, but the majority of fundamental investors still weren't using it in their research process. So that's kind of what we started to do. So I jumped full time and joined ETR about 7 years ago now.
Yeah, and it's amazing. And, those skill set that you learned throughout your career, as you mentioned, you wanted to be a great writer. And, there's very much demands for that as well. I'm sure if you've used that throughout your career as well. But talk to me about when you experience kind of the fundamental research. Maybe we'll cover that briefly, what that is and
Sure.
why it's important. But it's always interesting that you mentioned specifically that you came across a gap in research that was provided. And in this particular case, you were working Wall Street and you were looking at commoditization of research and then how it all looks the same. As you mentioned, the banks were saying, buy and sell commodities and so on. So let's talk a bit about that. First of all, maybe kind of cover the fundamental research and why does it matter, and just for people that are not familiar with this space.
Yeah, certainly. So what we realized were the majority of our clients that were doing the high level of trading were all in tech. They weren't trading like oil stocks. Those were the guys that were really kind of, whipping money around and buying this stock and that stock. But they were doing so without, and I hate this phrase, but it's true, without the voice of the customer involved. And what we recognized was we needed to get back to the community, the actual IT practitioners, and find out what they were investing in. Where were their futures being spent? Because that was what the investors needed to know. So what we decided to do was let's start not even selling research. We started basically in stealth mode, just building a community of IT people, the true decision makers out there, which we now call ITDMs. And we just started going out on LinkedIn, different communities like you have, and asking them, would you be willing to join this community, take a survey? And that was where the whole thing started, because we realized that the investors were missing a huge piece of the puzzle, which was where were the spend dollars going? And that was really the foundation of ETR. The first couple of years, we just grew out the community and we started doing surveys and asking these guys, hey, what's your budget look like? Where are you spending your budget? Are you adopting this this vendor, or are you increasing, or are you decreasing, or are you replacing it? Over time, that data became incredibly valuable. So we got some data scientists involved. We were able to do cross-analysis. And the gap we saw was there are great research firms out there. Gartner is fantastic. Forrester is fantastic. IDG even more, because IDG actually uses data. But the two first ones I mentioned, at the end of the day, it's analysts telling you what they want. And those analysts can be influenced by the vendors themselves. So we wanted to eliminate opinions in the data. We just wanted it to be data telling people what to do. And it was a slow run at first until we got enough people. But now we've got thousands of people in our community that take our surveys. We have 10 years of historical data. We have a great team of data scientists doing analysis on that data. And the great part is for all the community members out there, the true IT decision makers, it's 100% free. We will never charge them. They give us the input, the source input, right? With just their knowledge of their budgets. We use that to create that research product. And then we hand that back out to the investment community of the world, the mutual funds, the banks, the private equity, VC funds. They're the ones who are our first target from a business model perspective. But the ITDMs that take our surveys, 100% free to them. And we can go into the difference between our data platform, our reports, the types of analysis we provide. But from, a starting point, that was why we created ETR.
And it's interesting because, as you mentioned, there's a certain influence over, over the end results. And sometimes it's also by, how you ask that question. Depending what the question is, the outcome can be manipulated. In today's world, it seems like the most IT decision makers, from CISO levels and so on, the way they at least initially look at solutions out there, they have maybe a circle of CISO friends or people that are in the same role, and they go out there and maybe they share a Slack channel or WhatsApp channel, whatnot, and they say, hey, I have this issue. What do you recommend? And then they get a kind of a aggregated, responses, and then they kind of go ahead and do some market analysis and so on. Where does ETR fit in that process in terms of decision making to what technology to purchase next?
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't think we should ever replace the talking of peers. That's an important aspect. But what we're doing is standardizing and creating that at scale. So if you have that issue, okay, I'm looking at, there's 3 or 4 vendors that I am looking at. I don't know which one to use. You can come to our data platform, plug that in, and have thousands of your peers telling you what's in front of you, telling you over time how that's trending from an adoption level, from an increase level, from a decrease level. You can see how that compares with stack alignment. So if you're aligned more with AWS, the data platform can cut. I'm only interested in AWS respondents that are in financial services and that are security experts. Once that happens, what you're left with is 400 or 500 responses. Now, which ones are they evaluating for their next gen EDR? Where am I going with endpoint solutions? I need to replace mine. Mine's at the end of life cycle. What's next? You can do all of that through data analysis to get to that point, get you much further along. And then, yes, go ahead and reach out to your community of peers or even through us. And we can get you set up with those people so you can talk and chat that last step. But just through the data platform alone and through our analyst reports, you can get 9/10 of the way there. But I don't think we should ever eliminate that last part, which is so crucial, talking to each other, right? Because it's one thing to say, okay, these are the 2 top 3 vendors. It's another thing to say, what's their service like? How easy is it to stand up? Is it easy to integrate? What are their API integrations out of the box? The data is not going to tell you that. Your peers are going to tell you that. So I would never really, try to take that aspect of the conversation out.
And how do you distill all that information and make it usable for people? Because again, just from looking at the number of variables we're looking at, the sheer number of vendors on each category, and there are like hundreds of categories. And then everyone's experience is slightly different depending on their environment, what they have in terms of existing infrastructure, in terms of, in all honesty, they might have just a bad rep, somebody who mishandled that particular communication, and then they had a bad, view of that vendor just because of that. How do you distill all of that and create a cohesive report that somebody can take and, again, make a decision?
That's a fantastic question. Interesting comment about the bad rep alone, right? So SentinelOne, for instance, looks incredible in our data. Very early on, we realized that CrowdStrike was not in a one vendor market. That obviously Microsoft is incredible in that space, but we were realizing very early on that at least from the IT community, SentinelOne's an extremely viable product. But then I started doing interviews and panels with end users, and I started to hear early on that they were having an issue with their rep, that they were being a little aggressive in their sales practices and tactics. So there's a two-part answer there. From just a data analysis perspective, we clean that up the best we can with our team of data scientists to basically give you dashboards, visualizations that are pre-canned, that are set up. So you can go in and say, from feedback from your peers, we know these are the 10 things that you're going to look at most. So we make sure those visualizations are pre-canned. So you take a survey, you get a login, you join, you get on the platform, you could start looking right away at our pre-canned analysis visualizations. But that's only going to take you so far. We're very aware that the data will tell you what's happening, but it never tells you why. So therefore, there has to be a story behind that data. So the other aspect is that ETR does have their own analysts. We constantly do interviews with our community members. We constantly do panels on subsectors and topics about these type of things, about integrations, about sales support, about the nuances of your tech stack alignment, if it's right and if it's not. We eventually, with our reports, are going to triangulate all of that. We're going to triangulate the data. We're going to triangulate the qualitative feedback we're getting from the practitioners themselves and just industry knowledge, as being analysts ourselves and what else is out there, what vendors are out there. We try to triangulate that and put that out in our reports. So it gives you a pretty holistic view. And at the end of the day, not taking a knock at some of my much bigger competitors, which I would love to be someday, our analyst opinion is not influenced by any potential pay on that side. There's no pay-to-play model whatsoever. There's no advertising on our site. So it's really just, we try to eliminate opinion as much as possible. It's the data and the direct feedback from the people taking our surveys.
So who are the consumers of these type of data? You mentioned this specifically kind of the buyers on the technology side, but also potentially institutional investors.
Yes.
Who else can consume this information?
So it was a funny journey. I came from Wall Street, and my buddy came from a background that was more angel VC startup. So, he had this idea, and I said, okay, that's great, but you're selling to the wrong audience. He was going to sell the data back to the tech companies to help them set company guidance, quarterly guidance. So every tech company has to report earnings, and they need to have some sort of purview into how they're doing. That was his original concept. And I said, okay, we can get to that, but we need to start selling to the mutual funds, the hedge funds, the investment banks, the PEs, the VC. They're thirsty for data. They need it. So I kind of pivoted the model. So our first strategy was directly financial services sales. To this day, that still accounts for 83% of all of our revenue. But as I say, a funny thing happened along the way. Suddenly, some of the enterprise tech companies themselves started reaching out to us and saying, hey, we're hearing about this company. I have no idea what ETR is, but apparently all of our investors are consuming your research and it's being brought back to us. How do we get it? So we made it very clear with them, well, listen, there is no pay-to-play model, that we're going to be independent, stay independent. But if you'd like to subscribe to our data, I have no problem with that, right? Because the data is what it is. Again, there's no opinion involved. Don't get mad at us if the data says that your company's not doing well in a certain market or subsector, but we're happy to do it. So that's actually been a huge growth area for ETR over the last 2.5, 3 years, where now the enterprise tech companies themselves are aware that there's another market research firm out there, and they're starting to come to us. Obviously, I'm not going to name logos, for their, privacy, but we have some in security, cloud, data warehousing. Across the board now, we're starting to get more and more interest on that side. But for your community, and more importantly, I just want to reiterate, we're never going to sell to them. We have no interest. Our business model would collapse if they stopped participating. So we, first and foremost, our community of IT decision makers is everything to us. So all they have to do is hop on, take our surveys, and then they get free access to all of it. So we're really trying to serve them. And by doing so, the more community members we get, I like to say there's a gravitational pull, right? The reason why Gartner is so, important is because they have hundreds of thousands of people contributing. So everyone needs to listen to what they have to say. As we grow from 1,000 to 5,000, hopefully getting to 10,000 qualified IT decision makers, there's a gravitational force there. And then it's not just from the financial services side, but the true enterprise tech vendors themselves have no choice but to listen.
So some of the big consulting, survey, market research companies out there, it's a lot of times a pay to play. So, for example, they allow you as a tech company, whether it's emerging tech or established tech, to have a conversation with one of the analysts responsible for that particular, magic quadrant or whatever you want to call it, and that is in turn may influence the kind of the outcome, but also allows the vendors themselves to figure out if they're taking the right approach and the right direction in the marketplace. Is this something you also provide?
No, we have no interest in providing that angle for them. We have done custom surveys, which is very different than consulting. So what we will do is we have plenty of tech vendors coming to us and say, your data is showing a gap here, that our strategy in this particular security isn't resonating. Why? And what we can do then is go out to our community and do a very specifically crafted survey to get more information to that person. But our logo and our slogan here at ETR is something I love, and it's our mantra. And that is, opinions only exist due to a lack of data. We don't want opinions. If somebody's asking for us our opinion, what we're going to do is get them more data. Say, I don't have an opinion, but I can tell you this is what the data shows us. So we do have that ability to provide custom type of work. And not just from the surveys, but I also, I interview hundreds and hundreds of our IT community members every year. So I will do focus groups. I will do targeted interviews and find out from the IT decision makers themselves where their pain points are, what they want to see on roadmaps, what integrations are necessary for them to even think about switching to a vendor, the type of things that aren't going to show up in the data. So we do all of that on a custom bespoke model, yes, but never opinion. So if it is going to be an opinion, it's going to be that of a qualified IT practitioner, of the person making that decision, the person actually utilizing and implementing that technology. I'll take their opinion because in my I believe that's expert analysis. But as far as an analyst relations driving a product, no, we don't do that, nor do we have any plans to. And by the way, why should we, right? The Gartners and the Forrester of the world, they do a great job of that. And if I were going to turn around and say, I'm going to beat Gartner tomorrow, you would laugh at me. They're a multi-billion-dollar market cap company that's growing earnings hand over fist every quarter. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that opinions are eliminated and that we have good quality data for all three of our community members to make those decisions.
There's always a place for disruptors in the marketplace in terms of, and there are a lot of people out there that don't necessarily want to pay to play. Emerging tech is such that, some of them are much rather spend the marketing dollars or, somewhere else. So let me ask you this. How do you know where to go, like in terms of designing, a new survey and researching the market? It's a fast moving target. It looks like if like, let's say cybersecurity endpoint, security market was, lasted 3-4 years, or, mobile device management lasted, 24 months. It seems like it's shrinking. So it's really difficult to stay on top of the marketplace and figure out what should I research next. How do you design those? And, what's the kind of the secret sauce to provide to make sure that you're on top of it in terms of, because by the time you get asked a question, it's already too late. You already have to have something ready.
I agree. And we pride ourselves on being very early, extremely early. But let me break down a little bit. We have 3 different core surveys that we do. One is macro. So it's really on a larger, broad trend basis, what's happening. That always helps us actually identify things maybe a touch early, whether it be the work from home shift. We were on top of that in mid-March of 2020, wow. Largely because you and I are both New York City based. So it hit us a little bit earlier than the rest of the country, but we were able to get out in front of that right away and start tracking hard data on how many people were actually shifting remote. So we were on that 6 months earlier than mainstream media was. So the macro surveys help us, whether it's supply chain issues, procurement issues, all the things. We get that kind of early. And then when we notice it, we'll dig in. But we also break up our core surveys into two. One is emerging technology, as you've mentioned 2 or 3 times. So we have a core survey that we call ETS, Emerging Technology Survey. And there we're asking about companies that are not yet public, Series A through Series E. Are you aware of them? Are you evaluating them? Are you allocating real dollars to them or not? So we use that as a bubble up. And we can actually break that down by subsector. So we can see which subsectors of spending are getting hotter pretty quickly. Then we have the more mature companies, which we do, which has 400 or 500 vendors in there. And that's the large vendor landscape. And from there, you can kind of determine where the denouement is or where the top of the cycle is for them. And they're starting to come down rather early. And we can cross-reference the two. So we can see what's moving in the emerging and what's moving on the mature names and have that ability to kind of get a larger view of the landscape that's out there. Now, that's a long answer. The short answer is the same for everything we do. It comes from the community. They're going to tell us what they're doing. So when I have the opportunity to interview, maybe a CISO and I say, okay, what's keeping you up at night? What do you need to replace? Where are you with your legacy firewall? Where are you with your legacy endpoint? Is XDR real or is this a marketing bullshit term? Excuse my language. But we have to cut through that stuff. And a lot of times that happens through the panels and the interviews. And then once we get the answer from them, then we know how to go out and do it. And if I can real quickly circle back, you made a great point when we first opened. Surveys can be misleading. Questions can be crafted in a way to garner what you might want. So we have always from day one been incredibly important about getting qualified statisticians, qualified data scientists, qualified survey writers to make sure we don't have any opinions sneak in. If it was just me or the original founder, we wouldn't be qualified for that, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a market research guy. I'm a Wall Street guy. I'm not the right one qualified to be running our data science side. So we from day one recognize that, and we've siloed them to make sure that even our own agenda doesn't get boiled into the surveys. So standardized answer options allows us to make sure we eliminate that, and also allows us to do better time reference, time historical analysis on it.
I think the other side of the coin as well is if you're large enough, once ETR gets to be big enough, and maybe you can influence the market as well. You can, because any recommendations you make, potentially can lead on to a, better success of that particular segment, better success of that particular vendor. Have you thought about that?
I wouldn't want to. And the reason why is because even if we get to that point, that recommendation is going to be based by the end user. It's not our recommendation, right? So if the data is showing that this particular area needs to be addressed, or this particular vendor is the best one to address a need you have, then so be it. But the data is always going to talk. So if we get to that point where I was saying earlier, where there's enough of a gravitational pull that our voice actually does have influence, that's great. But my job is to make sure that voice is not opinion driven, that voice is data driven. So you're never going to catch me on that one. It all comes down to the IT decision makers telling us what their needs are. And then, by the way, then you should listen to us, because you could trust that it's not opinion. You could trust that I didn't accept a 7-figure payout from the next hot Silicon Valley startup, but that the data in an audited way is showing you where the trends need to go to.
And that's a good point as well. You mentioned that the consumers are, the kind of the tech companies themselves, and then the investment firm. What about venture capitalists? Because you can be almost like a venture VC whisperer, where they come to you and you have such insight, and they love data, right? It's all about the data. Show me the market size, show me the technology, show me the founders, show me they just like numbers, because, frankly, the majority of them don't really understand technology anyway. It's very tough for them to understand technology across the board. So have you done any work with venture capitalists?
We have. We certainly have. And I mentioned earlier that we now have 2 core surveys, and one of them is the Emerging Technology Survey. The exact reason we launched that was because of a need to go earlier in the life cycle of a vendor. We need to get to those names before they're aware of them. Now, I would say Silicon Valley does a very good job of being aware of who's out there very, very early. So it's hard to get them a name that they haven't heard of. But what we can do is get them, consistent quality data on those names and give them a better way to track them. As far as the questions we ask for emerging are you aware of the company? So we'll go out to 1,000 of our IT decision makers and say, here's 5 new names in security. Are you aware of them or not? And if you are, do you plan to evaluate them? Have you already evaluated them and just said, sorry, they're not good enough for me? Or maybe you're just a real early adopter and you're like, Eric, you know what? Not only am I aware of them, I've already evaluated them and I'm allocating money to it. Like I'm already in. We're actually in the middle of our ETS survey right now, and I pulled out a few names. Probably to your audience won't be surprised, but we're seeing Salt Security. We're seeing Sneak, Perimeter X, Abnormal Security. These are not household names for everybody. They are killing it in our survey right now. All of them are up and to the right in our awareness levels and our evaluation levels. So these are the kind of things that we can get back to the VCs, get back to the early stage investors, but also, more importantly, again, get back to the community. Because you might be a CISO that's super busy with your board, super busy running your company, and you don't have the time to always be aware of what's next. So you can take a quick snapshot of our data every month, once a couple of months, and then go in and look at it. And then we can dig in deeper for you if you need to. So yeah, it's important to get very early in the life cycle. I agree.
And do you have like an inner circle where, people say, hey, can we grab a coffee? Can we grab a couple of drinks of people that, quote unquote want stock tips, but it's not really, it's just to say, hey, I have some money to invest. What do you recommend? And I'm sure that's happened before because you do have an amazing quantitative, pulse on the marketplace.
Yes. And remember, over 80% of our revenue comes from people that are consuming this data for the purpose of investments. So for our community members, it's not a clear deliverable, but certainly if you're an active investor in your own PA or a personal account, you would be silly not to look at our data because it directly correlates to revenue of public companies. Now, what I will be very careful to say is that is the only input ETR does. We are not going to tell you what earnings are. We have no visibility into the line items of a public company, meaning how much is their SGA increased or decreased? Do they have marketing dollars? Do they have a large amount of debt payoff that maybe impacted earnings on that quarter? We have zero purview into that. Very clearly, our data correlates to top-line revenue. And we have proven that it correlates to top-line revenue. And we have regression forecast analysis to kind of prove that and help predict where revenue will fall. So that's, again, a long answer. Short answer, yes, a lot of our community members are curious about like, hey, where are you investing? Where would you invest? And we have the ability to cross-reference that data with existing financial information, meaning, what is a sales multiple? What's the PE multiple? And then kind of create, a dashboard. Someday I'll show you along. We actually have a full tab in our data model that says idea generator. And it cross-references ETR data with financial analysis metrics. And you can kind of pull up your own ideas.
It's phenomenal. And you know what else? I think that the other audience of people that would love to get a glimpse of this would be, let's say you're looking to do your next move, switch careers or just move to another company. And a lot of times you're trying to find kind of the next, winning horse. And you're unsure because, the recruiter tells you, how great the company is. Your friends might tell you, okay, this is a hot market. And then you end up joining and it's like crickets, there's nothing going on. And I think in this particular case, you mentioned that you have, preview to, what are kind of the successful startups out there because of your particular market research. And that information is not available. Again, it's more of a hearsay, word of mouth, as opposed to actual quantitative data.
Yeah.
So
and
maybe you
should I've had a lot of community members reach out to me over the years. And that's more of a one-on-one. This isn't done on a large level. You're not going to see a dashboard in our visualization tab that says like, hey, job movements. But they do reach out to us all the time and say, hey, I've been approached here. I'm thinking about this change. Do you have any opinion on it? What do you think about this company? And again, it's not an opinion. I'll go in and show you the data on what it is. There's 2 other aspects that are really helpful on this. We don't only track their spending on a name. Based on the actual metrics in the survey ourselves, we're able to track what we call pervasion, or how has the market share of that company grown or decreased within our community. So what I mean by that is, say 10 years ago, SolarWinds, 80% of the market would have said, yeah, I'm aware of SolarWinds and this is what I'm doing spending with them. unfortunately, since the breach, what we can see now is when I send out that survey, it's now only 30% saying, yeah, I'm still involved with SolarWinds. Now, that's an obvious one. We know that happened. But what is less obvious is when you see a company, if their citation in our survey is growing, meaning that we had 400 citations last year, but now it's 600. Now, the spending might not have changed as much, but that means that the company is growing accounts. It's getting more entrenched in the industry. That right there is something that's wonderful when you're trying to decide whether it's your personal career or if you're trying to decide, I need a long-term partner, and where am I going to invest my IT futures? Is this company trending in the right direction? So that's another aspect that we track, is just how are they moving within the survey community itself? Are they growing pervasion or are they losing pervasion? Which in itself can really be very telling. But yes, the community has many times reached out to me and said, what do you think of this move? And we're happy to, anytime they reach out to us, it makes our day. We'll talk to the hedge fund guys all day long, but when a community member reaches out to us, we drop everything and we answer that question because we're nothing without them.
It's super interesting. And have you, any people remember stories? Any particular stories? Like, for example, one thing to come to mind is like, you do a survey, and all of a sudden you have this like holy shit moment where like you have to do a double take on the data and verify that the data points are correct because something out there is just not right or it's not what you expected. Anything like that that's happened throughout those years?
Yeah, quite a few actually. I'm gonna name one right away, which was we launched a COVID impact survey in March of 2020. I closed the office around March 8th or 9th. We got the survey out around the 16th, a week later.
Wow.
And we did the first iteration, which people I think were like, no, like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, everything's fine. We did the next one in early April, and watching the drastic difference between, no, we have no intention of working from home, or it's 10% like it's always been. We watched that number go from 10 to 50, and then to 60, and then to 70. And all of the implications of that, right? Meaning business travel shutting down. What does that mean for Amex? What does that mean for the airlines? That was one of those aha moments where so many of our investor clients were like, oh my God, we've got this, we're early, we know about it. So that was one on a macro basis that was just too hard to ignore. And just because we were hustling and we got it out early enough that we had hard data at a time when there was a lot of confusion. Now, on a vendor level, there's been another interesting one that came out. Remember when Slack IPO'd? Now, Slack started off as sort of an in-app gaming chat. Great technology. I think they're wonderful. But when they first came out to an IPO, we did an initial survey, and what we saw was there was not a lot of appetite from the enterprise, that it was maybe more of a consumer, a small business type of thing, but we didn't really see huge enterprise adoption. So we were telling our clients upon the IPO, I don't know, the IPO at 30, I'm not so sure it's going to go much higher than that. And we ended up being very right about that until Salesforce took them out. And that same thing happened with Zoom. When Zoom came out, Microsoft is dominant in the enterprise, dominant in our survey. And we break out Teams, and we knew that Teams wasn't perfect, but we knew how pervasive it was. So our thought, again, was while we were watching Zoom's valuation go from an 80 IPO to 400, we were very vocal and very prominent saying like, hey, unless our data is useless, this is wrong. And we were very prominent about that as well. We got picked up in a few big media outlets for that one as well. Reuters, Bloomberg, Recode did a bunch of work on it. So there are times, usually once a quarter, where there's some data that stands out that it's just too hard to ignore. Snowflake is an amazing company, but in our last survey, we saw a big drop in overall what we call net score. It's our proprietary metric of how the vendor is doing. Now, still fantastic, but a big drop is a big drop. So I'd say every single quarter, there's at least one or two or sometimes three where the data is such a big shift that it's impossible to ignore. And we focus on that as writers and researchers. We try to get that out the door as quickly as possible.
Interesting. And what's next for ETR? would you incorporate? It sounds to me like that. First of all, that any practitioner out there should definitely get in touch with ETR and start getting into the community. That's for sure. I mean, just the fact that you get access to that data, that by itself is priceless. So I would highly recommend to anybody who's watching this to, get in touch, and we'll talk about how to get in touch with Erik and the firm. That's number one. And what about creating almost like, when you leave IKEA, you have this like little, smiley face, sad face. There's 4 buttons where don't you have to have like something like that? Maybe like a USB thing where you can connect it to your laptop, and every time you have interaction with the vendor, you click on that appropriate face, and then it will send the information back to ETR, for processing on a regular basis. Is that something you considered?
I absolutely love that idea. I think it's fantastic. I'm going to my CTO as soon as this is over and telling him we need it.
And it doesn't have to be the 4 buttons like that. It's going to be maybe a little more complex. I don't know.
I would love real-time data, because right now it's only quarterly surveys that we're doing. We're not taking any data inputs in real time. Nothing would make me happier than to see that to happen. To be very honest, what's next for ETR is about supporting our infrastructure for scalability. We were a very gritty type of startup name 11 years ago, 12 years ago when we launched this. We're not anymore. So just like all companies, you have to invest in your infrastructure to have that scalability and the maturity. And that's really where we're focused right now. We want to quadruple our community. That is what we want, but we have to make sure we have the people to support that first. We want to go out and get more CISOs, more CIOs, more CTOs, DevSecOps guys, DevOps guys, cloud architects. We want to get everybody in. And in order to, support them the proper way, what we're doing right now is the same as many companies, looking for talent, looking for hiring, making our back-end data architecture more robust. We have to walk the walk as well. We have to invest in our own technology to get there. But we do have big dreams. We do. And right now we're wholly focused on technology. But as many astute investors have pointed out, there's no reason we couldn't take this business model and expand it to another vertical. There's no reason we couldn't do it on the CFO side or the CMO side and track things that they have. Technology is everywhere now. So there are certain, apps that are only focused on finance, only focused on marketing. We could even branch this out into retail, consumer, whatever it may be. But for right now, we are dedicated wholly on the enterprise tech market. We want to go 10 miles deep and only 1 mile wide. So our focus right now is growing that community, thinking about different ways to utilize the data, cross-referencing that data with available data out in the world so we can get even better insights out to people. It's an exciting place to be. It really is. We're just sort of coming out of stealth mode. Nobody knew who we were. We've never even had a PR firm. So this, when I met you at the conference, that was really our first entrance into the world. So we're excited and we're poised for a lot of growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating. We need more of this. Again, I think it's for everyone's best interest to at the end of the day, whatever results you provide back, it makes everybody better.
Yes.
And even the end users eventually get more, and they benefit from having a better industry overall. And I think that's what ETR does. It makes the industry as a whole better. And there's nothing wrong with having, quantitative information as opposed to, this seems like this is a great idea, or this seems like a great product because Joe or Joanna said so,
right.
But it's tangible. And you currently focus on the U.S. Market. Are you kind of a North American centric, or you establish yourself worldwide?
Our community of survey takers is global,
Okay.
but to be very honest, 74% are currently North America. So that involves Canada as well. So it's only 26% right now that are outside of North America. We are actively trying to grow. There are just some data sovereignty issues, right? There is some GDPR issues about collecting data from certain regions. So we have to do it the right way and be careful about that. So that's why we're not bigger than we'd like to be in EMEA, for instance. APAC, it's impossible to get really information out of China. So, but we do have a lot in the other APAC regions. We're growing really quickly in the Middle East and Latin America. So we are trying to have that diversification, because there are certainly vendors that are much more entrenched in other regions than they are here in North America. And in order to improve our research, we have to diversify in that area. So the truth is right now, 74% North American based. Also, the data skews a little bit more large enterprise. So we're probably, 65, 66% large enterprise versus small to mid around 30, 35%. But that's really where we focus, right? The dollars are in the large enterprise. And that's kind of where we skew right now. And we certainly want to make sure that that grows in a proportionate manner. But we definitely want to have a wider geographical base, certainly. Now, we cover vendors from everywhere, but we need to make sure the survey takers that base grows. And it's, again, we have a great data science team of statisticians that know exactly what metrics they need to hit. And our community team is actively going out and trying to recruit there.
And I can tell, Erik, you work for a quantitative research firm. You're very precise in the percentage points that you provide, during this completely unscripted interview. So before I go to the kind of last but not least question, what's the easiest way for practitioners to reach out and take part and become part of the community? What's the easiest way?
Certainly. The easiest probably is go to LinkedIn. We have a community there. You could just type in ETR community and it'll show up. You can go directly to me, Erik Porter Bradley, on LinkedIn. And then we have the public-facing website, etr.ai, www.etr.ai. From there's an entire page just for community members. And you click on that link and our community team will reach right out to you. And I failed to state this, but there's also a small compensation. In addition to getting access to the data and the full platform and all of the information for free, we still realize it takes you time to answer the survey. And there's been a lot of studies done over the years, even going back to being a kid, when you would get a mailer and they would ask you to fill it out. Do you remember they would tape a quarter onto it? Because there's a lot of studies that even if they give you $1, you're more likely to be honest in your answers. So we actually make sure that there's a small gift card in compensation for every survey that you take. You can choose to accept that. You can choose to offer that to a charity as well, either or. But we do offer a little bit for your time for every survey you take. And then in addition, you'll automatically get a free login to our platform. And then you could have a session with me or one of my analysts to teach you how to use the platform. You'll get on our mailing list for a weekly newsletter, which has tons of insights and articles. Plus, you'll get those vendor and quarterly reports that come out of each survey. So, yeah, like I said, it's kind of a no-brainer for a community member. And, we're excited. Hopefully we'll get an onslaught of more people jumping on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've seen a glimpse of that platform and it's amazing. It's like you almost get mesmerized a little bit by the sheer number of data points. And then some of the, as you mentioned, you've been doing this for a while, so you can see the trends associated with it. And speaking of trends, what's exciting in the cybersecurity world right now? And
what is it? Are you kidding? It's crazy out there. It's absolutely insane. It's funny, the lead up to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think was the peak of outward, consistent attacks that we've ever seen. Now that the actual invasion has happened, the war is embroiled, we're actually seeing less. So it's very obvious. We're seeing the nation state actor activity changing. It's not actually coming from that person now. It's actually coming from maybe some allies in North Korea and China trying to keep up the onslaught. But we're actually seeing less. So it was really interesting to see the peak attacks were happening prior. Just an interesting interesting point there. But because of that, what we're seeing right now is ETR. Basically, last year we had a 10.5% budget increase in all of IT. And cybersecurity spending was the number one priority. We caught in January of this year in our macro survey that budget has dropped all the way down to 6%. That's a massive drop, really, really, really big drop. So we knew that the IT spending was being curtailed. We had that early on. In that backdrop of dropping spend, cybersecurity is the one area that's still growing. It's flat to growing. The spend in that area has to continue. There's so much end of life. I mean, not to call out a name or something, but if you're still running Sophos, you probably shouldn't. You probably should be looking at next gen XDR. So we're seeing identity still number one. And with that breach of Okta, I mean, I'm not sure. Our data, we did a quick analysis on that. There was no lesser appetite for using Okta because of that third-party breach. The stock has been cut by 70%, but according to our community, no one's moving off. They're still happy with it. So you need identity, whether it's around governance, multi-factor, whether it's around privileged account management. That's an area that we see continuing to grow without a doubt. This adoption of what we call XDR, but essentially trying to get more automated response at the endpoint level, is a huge area. I see no slowdown for a secure web gateway like Zscaler or that kind of privatization of your what used to be your old VPN. We see no slowdown there either. Those are three areas that are just absolutely marching ahead and are major priorities for everyone we speak to. On the other side, I do see some appetite to possibly replace what we used to call as a SIM. I think this promise of XDR should kind of stop this vulnerability management logging, because it should be included in whatever this next generation endpoint is. But in a nutshell, what we're seeing is a continuation of the perimeter is gone. So we spent decades trying to protect the perimeter in cybersecurity, and there is none anymore. The perimeter is now our identity. And you have to recognize that, you have to adopt it, and you need to kind of start implementing for that. So that's what we're seeing as a trend, and we're seeing all those names play out for it. The other thing I would say on the emerging side, it's all about container security, right? Where right now, even some of the best vulnerability management players are still on-prem focused. Not many of them are there in the container yet, and that's where we're going. If all of our apps are going to run in a container, then we got to wrap security around it. So those are the names that we're seeing a lot about, and there's a lot of excitement in that space as well.
Phenomenal. That was a really good recap. And it sounds like the adversaries and nation state should subscribe as well to ETR to figure out.
Good point. I got to make sure that there's no bots in there.
We do like the dark side of ETR where you they pay extra, they maybe pay like 5x, and then they figure out where should they divert the efforts to the least funded, the least developed type of controls out there. So they're seeing the trends as well. But we probably shouldn't give them any ideas.
Actually,
but
if you don't mind, I just need to say something to that, because I should have said this earlier. All of your survey responses are anonymous. So there's no way that even if one of those malicious hackers got it, they could ever track if your tech stack was lagging or not. So I do want to make that very, very clear. It's completely anonymized data. We aggregate it. We scrub all PII out of it. So the only thing that we'll keep is your industry, right? So you're going to say, I'm only interested in large financial services out of Europe. What are they spending on? So we can do that, but there's no way for anyone to backtrack and find out who you are. So thank you for bringing that up.
I was just partially joking, but they can probably take advantage of some of the trends associated with the results of these surveys, so they know where to spend their efforts in the next iteration of adversary activities.
Well, listeners certainly are very sophisticated in what they're doing, right?
No doubt. And I'm very happy to have somebody like you and the firm on our side. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But it sounds to me that we should have this on a quarterly basis or whatever, because it seems like you have the pulse on the market from a cybersecurity perspective. You definitely have tremendous insight. I love to do this on a regular basis. Every so often you come over and we talk shop about what you see. Actually, what you aggregate, what other people see in the marketplace.
Right? That's the easy part for me. I can never be wrong. All I say is, wait, this is what the data said. I'm sorry. It's what 3,000 people told me.
Yeah, exactly. It's not me, and you can't argue with data. We just have to argue with how the questions are being asked. But that's we talked about this, that you are very astute in terms of how you ask the questions, and you've done this for such a long time. But in the meantime, thank you very much for joining. Much appreciated. Again, it was unscripted, and you've done a phenomenal job responding. Looking forward to seeing you the next couple of events, and then in the meantime, stay safe online as well as offline.
Thank you very much. Soon. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed it. I would love to contribute anytime you want.
Take care, and I highly recommend check ETR out and join the community.
Thanks, David. Have a great day.
Take care.